The Song of Ice and Fire will be a battle of White Walkers versus dragons. When you think of creatures in Game of Thrones, there's two beasts that will immediately spring to mind: the powerful and regal dragons, giant flying lizards with a love for burning things with their fire breath, and the White Walkers, a group of humanoid species that brings the icy cold of winter in their wake. Neither of the two creatures have had the most screen time in the world, and let's be real, that's probably because of budgeting issues. But you have to admit that it's probably pretty likely that these two monsters are going to end up battling it out somewhere along the line. The two species are like the ultimate enemies in the Game of Thrones universe, and in a lot of ways, they're two sides of the same coin. One brings fire, the other brings ice. I mean, the series is literally called A Song of Ice and Fire, right? You don't get more fiery than fire-breathing dragons, and you don't get more icy than the winter-bringing White Walkers. Surely it's only a matter of time before the white-hot dragon fire is rained down on the White Walkers.
Jon Snow's parents, Lyanna Stark of ice and Rhaegar Targaryen of fire, coming together to make Jon, the child of ice and fire. There's also been discussion of the anticipated relationship between Jon and Dany, but before ice and fire can make peace, it's likely that we'll see them clash.
Number 9. Tyrion is Targaryen. We know that Jon Snow has Targaryen blood in him, but now there's a theory gaining support that he isn't the only secret Targaryen walking around the Game of Thrones universe. It turns out that Tyrion Lannister might be related to the Targaryens too, and there's some pretty strong evidence to suggest that theory could be true. For a start, it's been revealed that Aerys Targaryen had lusted deeply for Tyrion's mother, Joanna Lannister, and he even went as far as taking liberties with her during her bedding ceremony. There's also Tywin Lannister's relationship with Tyrion. Though they were supposedly father and son, they hated each other deeply. Joanna died giving birth to Tyrion, and Tywin took it out on his son. But could it be that Tywin knew the truth all along? His final words were, "You are no son of mine." Of course, that could have just been in the figurative sense, but it also could have been meant literally. The strongest evidence is Tyrion's fascination and skill with dragons. When visiting two of Daenerys' dragons in their crypt, he was able to approach them, touch them, and talk to them without the dragons taking so much as a bite at him. The only one with that level of control over dragons is Daenerys herself. So could he share the same bloodline? Could they be recognizing that within him?
Has made me realize there might be more to their backstory and future than the show is letting on. That character is Tyrion Lannister. And since his murder of his father, Tyrion now resides in Essos, serving as an advisor to Daenerys Targaryen. But what does Tyrion expect to accomplish with her, and why has the series united these two characters? The plot twist being that Tyrion is actually a Targaryen.
Number 8. The Wall Comes Down. The wall is 100 leagues long, 700 feet tall, and made of solid ice. And it's already pretty accepted by theorists that it's going to be coming down. The current speculation is that Bran would bring it down since he was marked by the Night's King. But recently, there might have been another option: Euron Greyjoy. Euron is basically Game of Thrones' answer to Captain Jack Sparrow. He's a larger-than-life pirate who considers himself a god. I mean, he literally says so in the show when he calls himself the Drowned God. But at the moment, he's a god without much. Well, godly power. Maybe he's after both the power of ice and fire. The fire would be dragons, the ice would be the White Walkers. Now, in Season 6, right before Jon Snow is made the king in the north, he tells the Northern Lords that the true enemy won't wait out the storm. He brings the storm. Obviously, he's talking about the White Walkers, but his wording is super interesting. When Euron first appears on the show, he says, "I am the storm, brother." The first storm and the last. But how will a pirate with dreams of goodhood bring down a massive wall? Well, in Season 2, the character Sam Tarly came across a cache of dragon glass and an old horn. In the books, the horn is said to be the Horn of Winter, which is actually capable of bringing down the wall. At the moment, Sam is in Old Town studying up, and in the books, Euron is going to raid Old Town. If he does, and Sam has the horn, it'll probably end up in Euron's control. Then again, in the books, Euron has another horn, which is able to control some dragons, but that hasn't ever been shown in the show, so that might not be dealing with the horns at all.
Hey guys, Pete here. Today I was thinking about the wall and how it might come down. This is something that most fans expect to happen in both the show and the books, and since the show is nearing the end, it won't be long until we see it go boom.
Number 7. It's all a dream. One of the most cliched and annoying endings to an epic TV show or book series is the "it was all a dream" plot device. That's basically when, at the end of everything, one of the characters wakes up in the real world and none of the events ever happened because it was all a dream. It's annoying because it makes the events of the show feel as if they weren't important because they never happened in the universe of the show. And yeah, there are people who think that all of Game of Thrones could just be a dream. They think that after Bran Stark got injured in the Winterfell Towers, he just dreamt the rest of the series up while in a coma or something. That, or this has all been a vision for Bran, and he'll wake back up at the beginning with the knowledge of the future. I don't know. This theory would mean that the past 6 seasons didn't even happen, and it feels kinda cheap. Number 6. The White Walkers aren't the bad guys. With an army of flesh-eating zombie creatures hungry for human flesh at their beck and call, it's hard to imagine the White Walkers being anything but evil. But some Game of Thrones fans think the icy creatures might not actually be as bad as we think they are. Usually in a story, the ultimate bad guy, in this show, the White Walkers, have a polar opposite, the ultimate good guy. But when you look at Game of Thrones, you don't really have that. The closest thing you have to the opposite of the White Walkers is the dragons, and they're not exactly the ultimate good. They're giant monsters as well. They're basically giant monsters that burn you alive and eat your kids. In the Game of Thrones universe, the White Walkers are on the other side of the wall. They're all that's out there and have been made out to be the ultimate others. Humans by nature hate and fear things that I can't understand, and the White Walkers are exactly that. The White Walkers are out there, sure, but maybe they're just defending their territory. Or maybe they have their own prophecies that say the dragons are going to kill them all, so they need to prepare an army. The White Walkers might even end up being the good guys. How's that for a twist?
Hey guys, so for today's video I thought we could have a bit of a chat about how the White Walkers might be defeated. If in fact, of course, they'll be defeated at all. And this to me opens the possibility that rather than one side defeating the other, that there could be some kind of resolution that falls outside of what we might expect.
Number 5. Samwell Tarly, the narrator. Samwell Tarly doesn't exactly do much. He traveled around a bit, stole a family heirloom that was never mentioned again, and then found a massive library. And that's pretty much that. Well, what if that's not true at all? What if the whole show was actually all being narrated by Sam from a future point? I mean, he has access to the biggest library in the Seven Kingdoms, right? This theory probably sounds pretty lame so far, but if we think about it in the terms of history and bias, then it starts to take shape a little bit more. If we imagine Samwell wrote the history books and that's what we're experiencing now, it'd be written with a northern bias. It'd explain why Jon Snow is largely depicted in such a positive light, and why the Lannisters are all ruthless and power hungry or just straight up evil. In essence, the whole Game of Thrones could just be one interpretation from a witness instead of what actually happened. The coolest bit of evidence for this is actually part of the library's architecture, and part of the title sequence. All those crazy spinning gyroscopes. Could it have been hinting all along that Samwell is the architect of the entire show?
Okay, so I have heard about the theory that Samwell Tarly may just be the narrator of the storyline behind Game of Thrones. It is a compelling belief, the idea that one of the most lovable characters in the fantasy could actually be the teller of this complex story.
Number 4. Jaime becomes the Voluncar. Who is the hero that would save all of Westeros? The prince that was promised. Azor Ahai. It's a question that's hounded fans of the show since the beginning. Most people think it's probably one of the heroic characters already seen on the show. You know, Jon Snow or Daenerys Targaryen. Or maybe even Tyrion Lannister. But one theorist thinks something different. Why not Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer? Not just that, why not a Jaime Lannister that also kills Cersei and forges peace with the White Walkers? It's a pretty complicated theory involving sword hands,